welcome to another episode of Miss Jody's Musical Minutes. I'm your host, Miss Jody. In this series, we have talked about many components of written sheet music. And while we still have a number of elements to talk about and examine and learn about, I wanted to pause for a moment and ask the question, where did all this start? When did they start writing down music in the first place? And did it look the same as it does now? Well, to answer these questions, we've got to go back in time. The earliest forms of written music come from the medieval times and began with the kind of music called Gregorian chant. This was named after Pope Gregory I. This music was the music sung by the monks in the Roman Catholic tradition. This earliest writing came about in the late 9th century, but music existed a long time before that. So before there was written music, the way music was passed on from generation to generation was by rote or by hearing it through your ear. So people would sing it and just learn the melodies as they hear it sung over and over again. Nowhere was it written down before the Middle Ages. Gregorian chant began as monophonic music. This means that they used just a one-note simple melody for the music. There was no harmonies, no chords underneath it. It was just one single note as the melody. Now, to write down this kind of music, they simply used slashes. A slash going up or a slash going down meant that whatever note you were on, you would go to the next note going up or going down from it. Now, this type of writing of music did not give you any indication of note length or duration. It didn't give you indication as to any kind of rhythm. It also didn't tell you what note to start on or what pitch you should be singing. So this first kind of written music was simply a guide to jog your memory of a melody you already knew. This was not something that you could look at and learn from just reading it. You had to already have known the melody. But this was a way to remember, oh yeah, that's the song that we're singing this time. After that, they began to add different shapes to the notes. They began to add shapes like squares and diamonds, which would later turn into the note heads that we know today, which are circles. Now, they would move these note heads of squares and diamonds up and down to show if the note went higher or lower than the pitch you were already on. These were also placed above certain words or lyrics in the hymns that they were singing. Again, this type of writing did not give us indication of rhythm or even what pitch we were starting on. So again, this wasn't the kind of writing that we could look at and know how to sing the piece if we didn't already know it. Again, it was a guide to jog our memory for something that we already knew. But it was a start. As time went by, they began to use one or two lines as a common reference point for an actual pitch. Sometimes they would even give those lines color to make them stand out. Now, if they were using one line, they used the pitch middle C as the common pitch from that line. And that's the note that's right in the center of the keyboard, the most common note, middle C. If they added that second line, they used middle C and F, which was a very common interval. If you take a look at this next example and look very closely on the left side, you can very faintly see the letters C and F next to those lines. So now we have some sort of pitch reference, but we are still pretty basic when it comes to the note length or the rhythm. Now the push to get more universally known throughout the lands came from religion. The heads of the churches knew that they wanted to increase their popularity, which meant increasing their power. To do this, they wanted people to be familiar with their music, and having it written down was really helpful. When you were able to take music to all the different far-off lands, then people would know your music from all those places. It spread a lot faster and a lot wider than just learning that music by rote or by ear. Once we started writing down this music, after a couple hundred years, we see the development of a much more detailed system. We see that we start adding the stems to the note heads. We start seeing patterns in those note heads that have specific rhythms that are attached to those patterns. And we also see the use of more of those lines to create those different pitches. And it began to look like this. Now this example still only had 4 staff lines, but eventually they would add that final, last 5th staff line. One thing to note at this point was how not only was the writing of the music becoming a more understandable system of symbols and notation, but the artistry became extremely ornate at this time. The writers were actually more of an artist, and the written music became so ornate that it started to match all of the ornate belongings and decorations inside the churches. This type of ornate manuscript was called Illuminated Manuscript, and it looked something like this. These writers or artists were very, very proud of their work, and they all tried to kind of outdo each other with their ornate decorations on their manuscripts. Over time, the music note symbols developed into what they look like today. There was a problem though. For hundreds of years, everything had to be written by hand, and this took a long, long time for people to copy music and be able to give it out to other people. So it was a huge relief when we first saw the invention of the engraved printing. Engraved printing meant that they would take sheets of metal and they would carve the image into that metal and then pour the ink inside and then press it right on a sheet of parchment. This would create the image just like it was engraved. And then they could repeat that over and over again, which saved so much time. Even better than that, they began to print pages of just the 5-line staff so the composers wouldn't have to start with writing those 5 lines all the way down a page. They could just start writing their music. As with all handwriting, the composer's handwriting, or manuscript, could range from easily readable to barely legible. So I want you to see what some composers' handwriting or manuscript looked like. Let's take a look at Mozart's original manuscript. Now let's take a look at Beethoven's original manuscript. When composers are writing music, they're writing all the parts together at the same time. Now, if a new work was going to be performed, we had to make sure to have time to separate those parts into each individual player's music. So this led to a new job called a copyist. The copyist's job was to take the composer's manuscript and separate all those stacks of notes into individual parts for each of the individual musicians. Now this would free up the composer to have time to keep on writing music instead of sitting there copying out the individual parts for each person. The copyist would then have that tedious and time-consuming job, and that was fine because they were a laborer, and the composer was the creative sort. And the rest, as they say, is history. In today's modern world, we have programs on the computer where I could play something on the keyboard and instantly I see it as a written sheet of music. I could take that and with a push of a button, I could make changes. I could separate it into individual parts. I could push a button and hear what it sounds like, each of those individual parts. I could even push another button and send it directly to the musician at their house so that they could see it in that moment too. You have to think to yourself, consider, how much music could we have had from somebody like Mozart in his short life if that kind of technology was available in his lifetime? I guess we'll never know. Thanks for tuning in and join us again for the next episode of Miss Jody's Musical Minutes. Bye-bye for now.